All right, let's talk about one of the biggest decisions you have to make when you're building on AWS. Which relational database are you going to use? We're going to break down the two heavyweights, RDS and Aurora, so you can figure out which one is the right call for what you're building.
Look, we all know databases are the absolute heart of our applications. But let's be real for a second. Actually managing them? Oh man, the backups, the patching, the scaling, just making sure the whole thing doesn't just fall over at 3 in the morning, it's a huge headache. And this is a pain that has kept developers and ops teams up at night for, well, forever.
And that reality brings us right to this core dilemma. When you're building in the cloud, you're not just picking a technology. You're making a choice that's going to have massive consequences for your app's performance, how much it costs, and how well it can take a punch. It's not just about a database, it's about picking a whole operational model.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's use an analogy. Think about cars. Amazon RDS is kind of like a high-end, fully serviced leased car. You know the model, it's an industry standard, like your classic MySQL or Postgres engine. AWS handles all the oil changes and maintenance for you. It's super reliable, and it gets the job done. Aurora, though. Aurora is like a purpose-built electric vehicle. It was designed from the ground up for its environment, the cloud, with a totally new engine for mind-blowing performance. They'll both get you from A to B, but how they do it under the hood is worlds apart.
So let's start with that leased car, the managed workhorse that powers so many applications out there. Amazon RDS, the relational database service.
Now, what's so great about this slide is what it really represents. It's a list of all the things you get to stop worrying about. I mean, when we say RDS is managed, this is what we're talking about. AWS takes care of all those tedious but absolutely critical tasks. You're not writing backup scripts anymore. You're not planning downtime for patching. You're not manually setting up a standby server just in case. It's all just handled. Okay, so what happens when your app gets popular? How you scale this workhorse? Well, you've got two main levers to pull. For reliability, you flick on a multi-AZ deployment. Think of it like having a perfect, real-time clone of your database in a totally separate building. If one goes down, boom, RDS just flips the switch to the other one automatically. Then for performance, especially when you've got lots of people just browsing your site, you add read replicas. They take all that read traffic off your main database so it can breathe. Okay, now let's shift gears and talk about Aurora. And I need you to remember our analogy here. This is not just RDS with a new paint job. This is the purpose-built EV. It's a fundamental reimagining of what a relational database can be, designed from day one for the cloud.
And this slide right here, this nails the core concept perfectly. You see, RDS takes a traditional database where compute and storage are all bundled together in one box and then manages that box for you. Aurora reimagines the whole thing by ripping those two pieces apart. It separates the database engine from the storage, and then it makes that storage layer incredibly smart, distributed, and fault-tolerant. Honestly, this one idea is the key to everything that makes Aurora so special.
So, the proof is right here in this table. Just look at that storage row. For RDS, it's traditional, monolithic, a single big block. For Aurora, it's distributed and self-healing. That single block in RDS has to be copied in its entirety. But Aurora storage is made of lots of little pieces that are constantly talking to each other and healing themselves. And that one architectural change is why Aurora has its biggest advantages. It's why a failover that could take a few minutes in RDS is often under a minute, sometimes just seconds, in Aurora. It's also why adding replicas is so slick and seamless.
And this unique architecture gives Aurora some serious superpowers. Seriously, we're talking up to 5 times the throughput of a standard MySQL database and 3 times that of a standard Postgres on similar hardware. You get that ridiculously fast failover we just mentioned? You can spin up to 15 super low-lag read replicas for crazy amounts of read scaling, and if you're building a truly global application, you can use the global database feature to replicate your data all over the world with less than a second of lag. It's wild.
Okay, so theory's great. But let's bring this down to earth with a real-world example. We're going to have ourselves a little showdown and see how you deploy a simple SaaS app on both of these platforms.
So here's our app's database schema. It's about as standard as it gets for a multi-tenant SaaS application. We've got a tenants table for customers, a users table for their users, and a subscriptions table. Super simple, but a perfect test case.
Right. So if we're building this on RDS, the key word to keep in your head is instance. First, you provision a database server, an instance. Then, for high availability, you enable multi-AZ, which creates a whole second standby instance. Then, as you grow, you manually create one or more totally separate read replica instances. You see the pattern? They're all distinct, separate actions to manage distinct, separate servers.
Now, let's contrast that with Aurora. Here, the word to remember is cluster. You don't provision an instance, you create a cluster that has this shared intelligent storage. The cluster has one writer instance, sure, but you can add reader endpoints almost instantly. And why is it so fast? Well, because they all share the same storage. There's no massive amount of data that needs to be copied over. The whole process just feels way more integrated and was clearly built for scale right from the start.
So we've looked at the architecture, the benefits, and a real-world example, which brings us all the way back to the most important question of all. Which one is the right choice for your project?
Okay, this is it. This is your 3-point cheat sheet. This is the crucial takeaway. Let's start with RDS. You should probably stick with RDS if, 1, you need a very specific database version or a niche feature Aurora might not support. 2, your workload is pretty predictable and stable. RDS is fantastic for that. And 3, simplicity and cost are your absolute top priorities. For a lot of standard apps, RDS is just going to be more cost-effective. Now, when do you jump to Aurora? 1, your app absolutely cannot tolerate downtime. If you need insane availability and that sub-minute failover, it's Aurora, hands down. 2, you've got really high or really spiky read traffic. And 3, you know from day one that you're building a global scale application.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to chew on. You know, services like Aurora, they automate away so much of the complexity that used to come with building these high-performance, globally distributed systems. And as that trend continues, as these incredibly powerful architectures get easier and easier to use, do we eventually reach a point where we just always pick the more powerful option? Or will there always be a place for that simple, reliable, trusty workhorse? It's something to think about.